Hello again, this is Professor Lenz at the University of Colorado Law Library. In this video, we'll be looking at how to research federal statutory law. So here's what you need to know in order to successfully research statutory law. You should understand the publication pattern of statutes, how statutes initially are published as slip laws, they become session laws, and finally end up in the code. You should understand what codes are, how they are designed, and why they're valuable for research. You should know the distinction between an annotated code and an unannotated code, and why an annotated code is better for doing research. You should understand the different publications of the federal statutory codes, the official being the United States Code, but there's also the unofficial USCA and USCIS, who publishes them and how to use them. You should also understand how to search statutory codes in both their print and online versions. You should be able to read statutory codes for context. This is especially important after you do a search and you get a number of results back. You need to have some sense for where your search results land within the larger code. You need to be able to trace the historical development of a statute using a source note that's provided with each and every statute. And finally, you need to be able to understand how to validate the statutory text to make sure it is still current, or if there are any pending changes that might apply to your statutory text. In the first half of this presentation, I'll be addressing these first four items using a number of PowerPoint slides. And in the second half of this presentation, I'll address the other four items using a demonstration to illustrate the points, showing you how to use and search on the United States Code in the online services. The first thing we want to understand is the publication pattern of statutes. Legislative bodies create law in the form of acts. An act of the legislative body can be an entirely new piece of legislation. It can amend existing legislation in a little or large part, or it can entirely repeal existing legislation. An act can address a single subject, or it can address many subjects that are unrelated to each other. For the federal legislative body, for the United States Congress, Congress is free to address any number of subjects within a single act. At the state legislatures, typically they are required to limit their legislation, their act, to a single subject. At the federal level, when an act is enacted, it is assigned a public law number. There are public laws and there are private laws. We're really concerned with looking for public laws. The public law number takes the form of this citation you see on the slide. It's pub law or public law number 109-27, and what that indicates is that the first number, the 109, is the Congress in which that act was enacted, and the second number, the 27, is that it was the 27th bill passed during that Congress. The takeaway from this citation is that acts are assigned in chronological order. When the act is officially or finally published, it's initially published as a slip law. Before the internet, this would be a print of the act itself, one or how many pages it would be, and researchers could go get the item in print. Since the internet age, this is typically published as a PDF document to the Congress's website. At the close of the legislative session, all of the acts that were enacted during that session, all of those slip laws, are collected and then they're published into session law volumes. So the session law volumes will reprint the slip laws in chronological order, in the order in which they were passed by the legislative body. So the one takeaway from this slide is that a session law volume is a chronological publication of statutory law. The official session law publication for the federal government is the United States Statutes at Large. Sometimes you just see this as Statutes at Large. So the act, which already has been assigned a public law number, is now given a statute at large citation, and it'll take the form that you see on the slide, 104 Stat 127. And you read that as volume 104 of the Statutes at Large publication, page 127. So every act has at least two references to it, the public law number as well as the Statutes at Large citation.
After the session law volumes are created, the next step is to create codes. So a session law publication, because it is a chronological publication, is fast to be published. So you simply collect the slip laws, you organize them by the order in which they were enacted, and you can publish that law and it's available to the public. But as a research tool, the session law volumes are problematic because there's no effort made to indicate what laws are currently in effect on the subjects addressed within the session law volumes, and as you saw, a single act even can address multiple and unrelated subjects. So the solution to that problem is really to create a code. And what a code does is it collects all of the statutory law in effect at the time the code is created and organizes them by subject. It recreates those session laws as a subject organization. And this makes it extremely useful for the researcher because our goal is to find all of the relevant law, in this case all of the relevant statutory law, that may impact our subject on our issue. There are two types of codes. There are annotated and unannotated codes. The unannotated codes are the simple ones. This is simply the statutory text plus the source notes or the historical notes, how that statutory text was derived. We'll look at that at the end of the session. The other type of code is an annotated code, and that includes the statutory text plus those source notes, but it also includes citations to cases, secondary authorities, statutes, regulations, that authority which is relevant to and impacts that particular code section, that particular legislation. So this is an enormously useful tool for us as researchers because it allows us to plug into, take advantage of the connectivity of all the legal resources. And when we're doing our research in statutes, using the annotated code, we can then find relevant cases and secondary authority. So the takeaway is that when you do statutory research, you turn to an annotated code for your statutory research. The official code for the United States government is called the United States Code. The United States Code divides up statutory law into 54 subject areas. These subject areas are called titles. So the U.S. Code has 54 titles. And these titles look at any number of different subjects, but such titles include Title VII, for example, in agriculture, Title XI is bankruptcy, 13 is the census, Title 17 is copyright law, 18 is crimes and criminal procedure, 21 is food and drugs. You can look this up yourself and see the arrangement, the subjects that are addressed in those 54 titles. Each of those titles, though, is divided into chapters and subchapters, sections and subsections. So a citation to the United States Code might look like this: 26 U.S.C. 2001. That's to say, that citation is to Title 26, which happens to be the Internal Revenue Code, I know it's the tax code, and it happens to be Section 2001, which deals with tax rates on estate taxes. Now, there are chapters and subchapters arranged throughout between Title 26 and Section 2001. You look it up to see how it's organized, but the takeaway is that the codes are not only organized by subject, but they're hierarchically arranged. So who publishes the United States Code? Well, the United States government publishes the United States Code itself. The official code is unannotated, and it's a very slow publication schedule. So by way of history, the first code, the United States Code, was published in 1926. There were 50 titles. created at that time in 1926. And the plan was to publish a complete new set of the code every 6 years. So the next new set of the code would have been 1932, 1938, etc. For the intervening years, the government publishes a cumulative annual hardbound supplement that includes all of the law that was enacted for that year. In practice, it's a slow publication schedule. The cumulative updates come out a little bit delayed, etc. You can find this code online at the USGPO at uscode.gov, or you can find it on Congress's webpage at uscode.house.gov. This is actually a little bit better version of the US Code. Of course, the commercial publishers have stepped in. Westlaw publishes the United States Code as the United States Code annotated. So unlike the US Code, this actually is an annotated code where both human editors and algorithms identify cases and other secondary authority that's relevant to those code sections. Lexis Advance has its version of the United States Code. It's called the United States Code Service. You'll see abbreviated as USCS. Again, it's an annotated code. And then Bloomberg itself also provides a annotated code. It's the United States Code, but instead of human editors creating the annotations, they have an algorithm that identifies cases citing to that code section. So it's an annotated code of sorts. So for us, what we'd want to do as researchers is look to one of those annotated codes that's available to us either in Westlaw, Lexis Advance, or at Bloomberg. So what research methods can we use to find statutory law? Well, the easiest way, of course, is if we have a code citation. That 26 USC 2001, we would type it into our search boxes and open it up, or we'll go to the shelf where our code is located and look it up in print. We can also use keywords to search an index or to search a full-text database. You can use a tool called the popular name table, which is extremely useful. If you have the name of an act, like the Affordable Care Act, for example, but you don't know where it's codified in the United States Code, you can look in the popular name table and you will see where it exists in the United States Code. It gives you a citation to where it exists. And then the last method is the topical or table of contents approach, or if you will, the structured approach. And this is simply where we would identify what subject area we're looking at. We look at the titles of the United States Code, and then we would drill down within those titles, or a few chapters or subchapters, to find a relevant section. So that's the background on information you should know about statutory law, its publication, and the United States Code. What we want to do now is look at how you search the codes, how you read the statutory codes for context, how you trace the historical development of a statute using a source note, and validating updating statutory law. So you'll recall we've been working on this research problem throughout these videos about a real estate developer, Jane Gabildit, who would like to develop a piece of property, but there is a creek that flows across her property that dries up part of the year. She'd like to fill in that creek and build on it, wants to know what federal law applies to the problem. What we'd like to do at this point in our research is find the applicable section within the Clean Water Act that defines navigable water. So we've already done secondary authority research on this problem. We've identified legal encyclopedia articles as well as American Law Report annotations that may address this particular issue or help us figure it out. And what we would have learned from that research is that this is a problem that falls under the Clean Water Act. So now what we'd like to do is see if the Clean Water Act defines navigable water. So that's what our research problem is going to be about. Before we open our browsers to Westlaw or Lexis Advance and start searching for this definition, we should take a few minutes and just plan our search. for our purposes, we really want to do a keyword search. We don't have a citation we can use to jump to a particular code section. Really, our alternative is to use keyword searching. But what keywords to use? Well, certainly we could use Clean Water Act. Perhaps we could use navigable water. That's the definition that we're looking for. We could use creek or stream, since we want to find out if a stream or creek is a navigable water. And maybe we include even in the definition the keyword search the word fill, since we want to know if filling is navigable water. There might be one other keyword we could use though, and that's definition. We're looking for the definition of a navigable water. So what's the better approach to use these keywords in our database? Should we just enter them into the search bar and search everything that's in the database, the content-driven approach? Or should we just search within the USCA, USCS database, the source-driven approach? I think here, and I propose here, that we ought to search within the United States Code databases themselves. We already know that's where we're going to find the Clean Water Act. We might as well eliminate all of the other non-statutory answers. We don't care for cases. We don't care for secondary authority. Let's go right into the United States Code. That'll be a more efficient search. Plus, we can take advantage of the fields that are available in the United States Code databases. So our first approach then is to take the keywords and use them. And if we were doing this research in print, we would turn to the index volumes. There are multiple index volumes for the USCA and USCS, and we would attempt to navigate from the index back to the code volumes where the code sections themselves are contained. Of course, we're going to do this online, so we need to develop some keyword search phrases. And one keyword search phrase we could use is simply definition and navigable water run again within the United States Code annotated or United States Code Service database. That might get us where we need to go. We could even refine that to definition within the same sentence as navigable water. We need to really run this as an advanced keyword search. The system will automatically default to that when it sees the /s. So that is an approach as well. And then perhaps what we can do, since we're within the database, why don't we see if we can run some of those keyword searches in the fields. And then we'll look at how many results that we get. So we'll go ahead now and run the demonstration of how to get to the United States Code and how to run these searches.
Okay, so let's go ahead and use Westlaw and Lexis Advanced to find the definition of navigable water within the United States Code. What I have pulled up on the screen is Westlaw. There are 3 different ways that we can get to the United States Code annotated. One is to start with this all content and look at statutes and court rules, and this will then give us the statutory codes really for all the states and other jurisdictions plus the federal. This is where we'd want to go, the USCA database. The second approach would be to start in federal materials, and then right here is the United States Code annotated database, very easy to get to. And the third approach is simply to start typing the title in the bar, United States Code, and there it is again, United States Code annotated. So 3 different ways to get to the same place. When you first land on the United States Code annotated database, a couple things that we should know: you should look at the information bubble to find out about the currency and coverage of the database. You'll also see a table of contents listing of all the titles in the United States Code. I said there were 54 titles. Here you can open up to any one of the titles, any one of the subject organizations in the code, and drill down to find code sections. You'll also know that the United States Code includes the court rules. So the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, the appellate rules, that are all here in the United States Code. Westlaw provides a tools and resources menu where you can find historical versions of the code. These date back to the 1980s. You have a template to simplify searching for code sections, a popular name table, and some other features, some of which have been ported over from the print tool to the online tool, and some provide access to public laws and other things. Let's go ahead and, one last item. We can, if we use the code, United States Code annotated frequently, we can simply add it to our favorites. This will appear then on the main page. We can even get to it more quickly. All right, let's go ahead and search for the definition and navigable water. Navigable water. Let's see what we come up with, right? That's what we were looking for. We type in that search, and we end up with $1,933 search results. That's quite a large result set, and it would be too time consuming to sort through all that. We would, though, want to look through the list and see how our search performed, where our search terms appeared. And we do find that the first result is relevant. In fact, that's the result we ultimately will want to find. And it's in Title 33 and it's Section 1362. But we see other definition sections. We see one in Title 43, we see one in Title 16. So we'll have to sort all that out, but immediately what we'd like to do is see if we can improve our search. And we said there was a slightly different search we wanted to use, right? We wanted to replace the and with the /s. We can just do that in the search bar, and now we go from 1,933 results to 137 results. This is much better. It's still a fairly large collection set. We still see some of the same results we had before, but it's much more manageable. I said there's a third way, though, third search that we wanted to run, which is a field search. So we are saying that might be a more efficient way to find sections dealing with definitions, hopefully defining navigable water. What we'd like to do is pull up one of the code sections where there is definitions as the title of the code section. So here it is. Definitions is this is where definitions appears in the code section. What we'll want to do now is try to find more like that. So here we can go to the advanced search, and this is where we get access to the fields for the USCA database. And here are the available fields to us: a preliminary field, a caption field, a combination of those two fields, a citation, credits, where we'll find our source node statutory text. But because we may not know this as new researchers, Westlaw provides a PDF document that tells us what these fields correspond to in the actual code that we read. So the preliminary section refers to the title and the chapter and the subchapter, etc. The citation, of course, is the USC citation. The caption, that's where we saw a definition. When we looked it up, we saw definitions here. So we'll want to search in the caption field for definitions. Then the text is the statutory text, and the credits is the historical notes and some other information. So we have the information that we need now where to search. So we'll close that window out. We'll resume our search. You see our previous search is still retained for us here. Let's just take definition and move it down into caption. And let's also take navigable water, and we could move that into the statutory text. Now you see that the search bar reformats our search. We see the CA is a abbreviation for caption, and TE is abbreviation for text. We could type that in. We run the search, and we come back with 235 results. So we have more results, but scrolling through the results, we see that almost all of them, in fact, all of them have the word definitions in the caption, right, in the title of the code section. So presumably this is a more effective search. We'll take a look at this in a minute. Let's go and look at Lexis Advance and see how this could be done in Lexis Advance. So switching over to Lexis Advance, we want to do the same exercise. We want to find the United States Code Service. Remember, that's the name for the USC on Lexis. And we have a couple different ways to get there, and they kind of give us some different results. One is we can look under statutes and legislation under the content type. And when this pulls up, what we'll see is we have all the various contents. We have state codes, but here we look at federal codes, presumably. And here's something just to know as we do our research in the USCS database is that we see that it includes the codes. Here is the United States Code Service. But this level also includes bill text, bill tracking, congressional records, etc. So if at this point we run our search, we will find provisions within the United States Code, but we'll also find where those search term appears in all of these other legislation sources. That search is really too broad. We'd want to take an extra step and look in the United States Code Service database. And like Westlaw, this provides us with a listing of all the various titles. We have access to an advanced search tab here, which we'll look at in a minute. And of course, we can look at search tips. We can also save this as a favorite database and put it on our main page on Lexis. And this is the review. Here, what we'd like to do is run that same search. The first one was definition and navigable water. And Lexis returns for us 310 results, which is less than Westlaw returned. And we see definitions appearing in our title of the code section. And in fact, Lexis has done maybe a little bit better job than Westlaw in this regard because it understands that we're looking for definition section, which is really what we were kind of driving at before. And of course, we see our section here right at the top. Let's try a /s this time. Can we modify our search? Let's go back to the search. We'll type in, replace the and with a /s. Does it do any better? And the search result answer is 37. It does a lot better. Now we're almost finding everything to be definitions here. So this is actually a fairly good search, and the one we're looking for is at the top. The last thing though we wanted to do was do an advanced search. So we got a couple ways to get to an advanced search. We can go back to the originating search screen and we can click on advanced search to get there. This is certainly the simplest way once we're into Lexis USCA database. And like Westlaw, it provides us with the document fields in Lexis. These are called segments, and here's what their segments are: citation, heading, text, section. Very similar, at least in content, to Westlaw. And like Westlaw, you also find a help guide here, the segment examples, telling us what those fields correspond to: citation, heading. And what was in Westlaw's caption, here in Lexis is section and rule, and text is text. Those are the ones we were mainly concerned about. Credits in Westlaw is history in Lexis. So we want to search the section and the text fields to see if that would improve our search further. Here is the search up at the top. We'll just move definitions back down into section, and let's move navigable water into the text. And you see it's reformatted our search with the appropriate field identifiers. We can click on the search button and we come up with 22 sections, all of which now have definitions in the section heading or the caption heading. And actually ours is now at the one we're looking for is actually the third result set. So all of these define in some way or mention in some way navigable waters. Interestingly, in Lexis, if you can go directly to this advanced search screen. If you go back to the main research landing page for Lexis Advanced, and instead of doing statutes and legislation, just did federal, you would then see a listing of what's available for federal content, and you could go here, the United States Code Service, and this defaults to an advanced search. So this is the two ways that we can find our code sections in Lexis Advance and in Westlaw.
Now that we have our result set, the question really becomes, how do we identify the appropriate definition section within that long list of result sets? So to do that, what we want to do is establish the context, to understand the context of that code section within the larger scheme of the code itself. And we have a couple different ways to do it. One is to look at a table of contents, look at the heading where that title and chapter, subchapter, etc. is listed, to see if the definition section, that code section, appears in the title that makes sense. We can also look at the table of contents itself for the entire code. You could start our research perhaps in the titles part of the code and drill down and title the titles that we think will work. The other thing we can then do is we can also look at a previous section or next section from the code section we're in, just to see if the other code sections around it make some sense. So let's go ahead and do that now.
Okay, now that we found our list of results for defining navigable waters, the next step is the context. How do we figure out which of those many code sections is the right one? And as I indicated on the previous slide, you want to look at where that code section lands within the code, and you can start doing that just by looking at the titles. So you see we're in Title 43 for these first two. We're in Title 33 for the third one. In fact, you see a lot of Title 33s. Title 42, Title 16. In Lexis, what you want to do is you want to look at this table of contents. So view the table of contents to figure out what Title 43 is if you don't already know it. And what we find out that Title 43 falls within, we'll get there eventually, public lands. That may be useful, it may not be useful. Let's see what else we have. In fact, the nice thing though, again, in terms of establishing context, we have Title 43 public lands, and then we're in Chapter 29 submerged lands, maybe, and under general provisions. And there's our definition section, and this is the other sections around it. So that helps us establish some context. Let's go back to the next one though. Here's 33, United States Code 1362. Let's do the same thing. We'll view a table of contents. And this time we discover that Title 33 has to do with navigation, navigable waters, bingo, that's really what we're looking for. That code section appears down in Chapter 26 under Water Pollution Prevention and Control, and then it appears under General Provisions. And here again, for context, are the other code sections within that chapter. So this is really a way in which we can do this in Lexis and Westlaw, looking at the table of contents. Let's open up the code section. The next thing we could do, of course, is open it up, review the code section, and now we find the hierarchy here in the codes in the code section itself, Title 33, Chapter 26, just as we saw before. And we also see the definition for navigable waters as a defined term. Before we dig further into that, let's go look at see how context is established in Westlaw. Here's a result set for Westlaw, and Westlaw makes it a little easier on us, ostensibly here, where we see our caption for definitions, and then you see that hierarchy for each of our result sets. So here you can see right away, Title 33 is navigation, navigable waters, 16 is conservation, 43 is public lands. This is that same section, submerged lands. And we see a lot more for Title 33. We see a Title 48, territories, insular possessions, but just getting a sense for our research problem, we really want to be here. So we'd open up this code section for definitions. And you have a couple of options additionally to establish context. Again, our heading, our definition. You can go to a table of contents from this point. This shows you the other code sections that are immediately around it, where our code section shows up in the overall hierarchy. And you can use the next section, previous section button. This is essentially like turning a page in a book. That part is very helpful too. So this is the other way in which you can establish context in Westlaw. Very important to do that to make sure you are in the right code section. As you can see, a term and a definition, a term can appear in any number of code sections, and you have to make sure you're in the right contextual area.
So in our demonstration, we were successful at finding the appropriate code section that defines navigable water. And if we looked a little more carefully at Title 33, we'd realize that that actually falls within the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, which becomes the Clean Water Act. There's another way we could go, though, if the search wasn't so successful, and that is to focus on not the term navigable water so much, but the Clean Water Act. And there is this tool called the popular name table that will allow us to find the Clean Water Act within the United States Code, and then maybe help us navigate to those code sections that way. So we're at this point, let's go ahead and look and see how that's done on Lexis and on Westlaw.
So now we want to look at another way in which we can find a definition section within the Clean Water Act, and that was to focus on the Clean Water Act in the popular name table. So here I am in the United States Code annotated database in Westlaw, and here are the tool and resources we talked about earlier, and here is the popular name table. And the way you use that table is that you can certainly scroll through the list, you can search it, you can also alphabetically jump to where you would like to appear in the table, and we can scroll on down to find the Clean Water Act. And here it is, the Clean Water Act. There are two of them, which complicates our research somewhat. When we look at legislative history, we'll examine it. For now, what you want, though, is the Clean Water Act in 1977. And up it comes. And so it's useful because it's telling us immediately, it tells us where the Clean Water Act exists within the United States Code 1294 and the following. It gives us the public law number of the originating statute. So this is 95 in the 95th Congress, bill number, law number 217, the date which it was enacted, in the statutes at large citation. So it gives us that information immediately. Here is access to the table of contents for the classification. Then the enacting law and the amending laws. This is the various sections within the enacting law, and this is when it was amended, and then the currency for it. So very useful tool. We can jump right to the Clean Water Act at this point to get through this code section. How about Lexis Advance? This is a little bit more complicated. We would want to go to statutes and legislation as we did before, and then we're going to want to look at codes, and this will come back, and then you finally see popular name table. This is the most, or a route to it at any rate. And then you see it's going to be the same thing, table of acts by popular names, names beginning with, and if we search Clean Water Act, we're searching within the table of acts by popular names. And it comes up with these first two entries. Federal Water Pollution Control Act, Clean Water Act of 1977. And it gives us a little bit of the same information. So anyway, this is a popular name table, a way to find an act in the code without knowing the code section.
We've already talked about how we can search for terms within fields, and we did that by looking for the word definition within the caption field. Peculiar to definitions, though, there's an additional field which is useful. It's called the words and phrases field. And this is a Westlaw field. And what you're doing is you're looking for, it allows you to look for where terms are defined in the statute. Let's go ahead and see if we can run this search, WP, which is the words and phrases, searching for navigable +1 of water.
So here we are back to Westlaw. This time I'm going to go back to the United States Code database because that's where the field search. We can just type in actually USCA. This is another way to get to the database even more quickly, and it'll bring it up. We need the advanced search. Remember that was over here, advanced. And then we see the various fields that we looked at already, and here's the words and phrases. This works within statutes. It also works within cases. If you want to find the definition of a word judicially defined, this is the way to do it. So we want navigable +1 water, right? This is essentially the phrase. Navigable water. Here is the definitions. Rather, here's the search. We run our search, and this is going to look a little bit like our other searches, but it's a little bit more refined. So this is actually where navigable waters is defined within the code, and here is our code section, and some other places where it's in quotes and defined within that meaning.
Another task that we need to do as researchers is to be able to locate older versions of a code section. The reason why we do this is that we need to know what the law looked like at the time our legal issue arose. We need to know what the effect of the law, what the law was at that time. And using the source notes or credits, as it's called in Westlaw, will tell us when the code section was initially enacted and when it was amended and where we can find that amended language. You can find older versions of the United States Code online, the official United States Code online at this address. And Lexis and Westlaw will provide you complete editions of the United States Code back to about the 1980s. However, even so, you can do this online by looking at the session law volumes, the statutes at large volumes. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how that's done on Lexis and Westlaw.
So here we are again in the United States Code, annotated, and this is the code section that we've been looking for, 33 USCA 1362, the definition section. So where we find the source notes is right after the statutory text, which comes to an end right here. You see credit, as it's called in Westlaw. And this tells us the historical development of the statutory language. This section originally appeared in effective June 30th, 1948, added by Public Law 92-500. We could find it at volume 86 of the Statutes at Large, volumes at page 886. It was amended again in Public Law 95-217, effective 1977, and then a number of times thereafter, 87, 88, 1996, all the way through 2014. So if we wanted to look at what the language looked like in prior versions, or what language has changed at least by the public law, we could click on what is linked and see what that law actually changed. So in 2008, Congress enacted the Clean Boating Act of 2008. As a result of that enactment, the definition section was changed. Looks like they added a new definition, or definition for a new term, recreational vessel, and then they defined it. So that's what was done in 2008. How about Lexis? Lexis is very similar. This is the historical note for that same code section. This is just at the end of the statutory text. You'll find this also in the official United States Code. And this is the history or source note. Same history, same links to the same laws. So this is very important when we get to legislative history. That is one One avenue into the legislative history to help us do legislative history research is looking at those credit or source notes. We'll talk about that later.
Finally, once we find our code section, we need to read the code section and try to understand what it says. We want to take advantage of the context of the code section in the larger code. We want to look for the connectivity resources. We want to look at the history as it's necessary. We also want to understand if the statute is still valid or if there's pending legislation. So let's turn back to 1362 one last time to look at those items.
So finally, let's quickly touch upon how to read the statute and then use the tools of the annotated code to help us advance our research. So here we are back in 33 USC 1362, the definitions section. We also find we're looking for the term navigable waters. We find this in section or subsection 7. The term navigable waters means the waters of the United States, including the territorial seas. That doesn't seem to be too helpful. We're going to have to do more research to figure out exactly what navigable waters means, what the legislature could have meant when it used that term. So we're going to have to turn to other tools like secondary authority that we've already looked at, but also like cases. So after we review the statutory language, after we might look at the credits for it, if we need to do that historical research, we then turn to the other tools. And if we go to the tabs across the top of the screen, we see a tab for notes of decisions. And these are the cases that the editors have selected that in some way interpret this code section, this 1362. And in this case, there are a lot of these cases. There are 205 notes of decisions. And in fact, there's so many that the editors have put together for us a category or topical view of the topics addressed applying to this particular code section. So we can either scroll through the listings below, or we could look through the hierarchical view. And let's see if we can find, and do we find cases having to deal with navigable waters. And we see it here. Navigable waters, our listing of cases here has now changed. And we see even there's several categories: navigable waters generally, navigable waters canals, channels, connection to public water, continuous flow, navigability, in fact, a whole bunch of cases. What we'll want to do as researchers now is read the summary that's provided by the editors about the case, and then look at the citation that's also provided in this blurb. And you can even look at the topic and key number, which we'll look at more carefully when we look at cases. And then you'd open up the case and read it, see if it's useful. This first case is actually may be useful. It's Rapanos v. U.S. Terms navigable waters and waters in the United States are used in the Clean Water Act, prohibiting discharge of pollutants into such waters without a permit, are not limited to traditional definition of navigable waters, namely interstate waters that are navigable in fact or readily susceptible of being rendered so. So what we'd want to do is add Rapanos to our research notebook. It's a U.S. Supreme Court case. It's probably relevant, and off we go. Okay, in addition to cases, we would also find we'd also find context and analysis. This is giving us cross-references to other parts of the code that are relevant, plus in this case, law review commentaries. We can use the post-search filters on the left to narrow down to either one of those two categories. We can go to citing references, and this provides us with more cases. These are cases in addition to the ones selected by the editors. You can see in our filter we can find in addition to an additional 1,200 cases, trial court orders, other statutes, regulations, and secondary sources. So if we wanted to find a whole bunch more secondary sources, we could narrow that list down and find their 23 AL articles, 46 Westlaw journals, 1,791 law reviews, a whole bunch more research that we can do. Finally, we want to talk about validity, right? Is the statutory language still good? Is it likely to be changed? And that is this flag, a key site indicator flag. We'll talk about more about key site in a later video, but for now, what this yellow flag indicates to us is that there is some proposed legislation that may impact this code section. And in fact, it's proposed in the 115th Congress and in the first session on November 16th, 2017. We could follow the link and look at what that is. Again, we'll look at that when we look at legislative history. So the takeaway, though, is that law is still in effect currently, and you just need to take a look at what the proposed change might be, because the proposed change might not even impact our code section in navigable waters. It may propose a change to a different definition or a new definition altogether to some other term. So that's where we are. We've covered statutes at this point. If you have any questions, let me know.